I'm standing in a house I almost didn't buy. And honestly, I still can't decide if it saved my life or completely ruined it. Yeah, I know how that sounds. Because right now, I've got everything most people would call made it. A paid-off property, money sitting in accounts I never thought I'd see in my lifetime, and a level of silence in my life that feels wrong, like the house is too quiet, like it's waiting for something. And the weirdest part? It all started with a listing nobody else wanted. But before I get into that, let me tell you something that still messes with my head. The night I first walked into this place, I didn't just find an empty house. I found evidence that somebody was living like they were trying to disappear. And I almost called the cops right there on the spot. But I didn't, because I was broke, tired, and desperate enough to ignore my instincts. Let me rewind. Back then, I was living in a beat-up apartment on the edge of town, the kind where the hallway smells like old cigarettes and bad decisions. I was working this dead-end job, bouncing between paychecks, and honestly, I was one flat tire away from disaster. I remember scrolling listings at 2:17 a.m. like it was some kind of ritual. Not because I had money, I didn't, but because looking at homes made me feel like I had options. That's when I saw it. A small house outside the city, dirt cheap, almost suspiciously cheap. The photos were terrible, like someone took them with a cracked phone in bad lighting. Half the rooms looked empty, the other half looked rushed, like the seller didn't even care. The description was short. Must sell fast, as is, no repairs. Most people would have swiped left instantly, but I kept staring at it because something about it didn't feel like a bad deal. It felt like someone was trying to get rid of a problem. And for some reason, that thought didn't scare me. It pulled me in. I didn't know it yet, but that night I wasn't looking for a house. I was stepping straight into something I would never fully understand. And the first clue was already waiting inside those walls.
I shouldn't have gone to see it alone. But I did. Because when you're broke, you stop treating bad ideas like warnings and start treating them like opportunities. The next morning, I drove out there in my old car that sounded like it was held together by hope and duct tape. The neighborhood got quieter the closer I got. Fewer cars, more empty lots, more houses that looked like they'd given up a long time ago. And then I saw it. The house. It looked even worse in person. The paint was peeling like sunburnt skin, the front yard was basically a jungle, and the porch sagged like it was tired of carrying weight. But the weird part, the structure itself was solid. Too solid for the price. Like someone invested in building it and then just stopped caring. I parked and just sat there for a minute. I remember thinking, all right, man, what are you doing? But I got out anyway. The lockbox was already on the door, which should have been my first red flag. That means nobody was protecting this place properly, or nobody wanted to. I opened the door, and that's when the air hit me. Cold, stale, like the house hadn't been breathed into in a long time. I stepped inside and everything creaked under my weight, like the house was judging me for being there. The living room was mostly empty, but not completely. There were signs someone had been there recently. Not furniture, not decorations. Smaller things. A faint mark on the floor like something heavy had been dragged. A corner of the wall with scratches. Deep ones like something sharp was pressed into it repeatedly. I laughed a little at myself, trying to shake it off. Probably just old damage, I said out loud, like that would make it less weird. But then I saw something that made me stop completely. On the far wall, behind where a couch used to be, there was a section of wallpaper that didn't match the rest. Not just faded, different, like it had been replaced, badly. And underneath it, I could see a faint outline, a rectangle shape, like something had been hidden there on purpose. I reached out without thinking, pressed my fingers against the wall. It sounded hollow. That's when my stomach dropped just a little. Because I realized something simple but very important. This wasn't just a cheap house. It was a house someone had already tried to erase. and I still didn't know why.
I should have left right then. Honestly, that would have been the smart move. Call the agent, back out, forget the whole thing like it was just a weird story I tell later. But I didn't. Because something about that hollow sound stuck in my head like a song you can't unhear. I stood there in that living room just staring at the wall, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Old insulation, bad construction, whatever. But my gut wasn't buying it. And when you're in my situation back then, broke, stuck, no real options, curiosity starts feeling like fuel instead of danger. So I did something stupid. I started knocking along the wall, slow at first, listening. Thud, thud, thud. Most of it sounded normal, until I hit one spot. Thud. Different sound, deeper, almost empty. I looked around like someone was going to jump out and yell at me for touching it, but of course, I was alone. That's when I noticed something else. There was a faint seam, not obvious at first, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. The wallpaper wasn't just mismatched, it was covering something, like a cover-up job done in a rush. My heart started doing that annoying thing where it tries to convince you to panic before you even know why. I grabbed the edge of the wallpaper. It didn't come off easily. Whoever did this didn't want it found. I pulled harder. Rip! A strip came loose, and underneath was an old wooden panel. Not drywall, not modern construction. Old wood. And scratched into it, barely visible, like someone tried to erase it, were numbers. At first, I thought it was random damage, but the more I looked, the more it felt intentional. A sequence, like a code, or a date, or something that meant something to someone. I ran my fingers over it, trying to make sense of it, and that's when I heard it. Not outside, inside the house. A soft sound, like something shifting upstairs. I froze, didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. Nothing. Then again, a faint creak, slow, deliberate, like someone walking, carefully, trying not to be heard. And in that moment, standing in a half-decayed house I barely owned, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. But here's the thing that still bothers me to this day. I never saw anyone leave, and I never heard a door open. I backed away from that wall so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. My brain was screaming at me to get out, but my legs weren't fully cooperating yet. It's like when you realize you're in danger, but your body is still buffering the update. "Hello?" I called out. Stupid, I know. No answer. Just that same heavy silence again. The kind that doesn't feel empty, it feels occupied. I looked toward the stairs. They were old, wooden, and angled in a way that made the shadows underneath them look deeper than they should have been, like something could actually be hiding there without being seen. Another creak came from upstairs. This time I was sure I heard it. One step, then another. Slow, careful, not random, controlled. I grabbed my phone in my pocket and realized my hand was shaking a little. I wasn't proud of that, but whatever. Fear doesn't really care about pride. I debated calling the cops, but then my stupid brain kicked in again. What are you going to tell them? That a cheap house made a noise? Yeah, that would go great. So instead, I did something even dumber. I went upstairs. Each step felt louder than it should have been, like the house was amplifying me on purpose. The railing was dusty, sticky in places, like it hadn't been touched in years, or like someone didn't want people touching it. At the top of the stairs was a hallway, 3 doors, all slightly open, all dark inside, and the air up there was different, thicker, like the house was holding its breath. I slowly walked forward. The first room was empty, just an old mattress on the floor, nothing else. Second room, same thing, but the window was covered with thick black plastic, not boarded up, covered, like someone didn't want light coming in at all. Then I got to the third door. This one was closed, fully shut, no gap, no light. I stood there for a second, just staring at it, and then, click, from inside. Not loud, just enough, like someone had turned something or acknowledged I was there. I swallowed hard. "All right," I muttered under my breath, trying to sound braver than I felt. I reached for the handle, and right before I touched it, my phone buzzed. One notification from the real estate agent. It said, "Don't go upstairs. Previous owner specifically requested that area be sealed off." I looked at the door again, then back at my phone. Then I noticed something I didn't see before. A small piece of tape on the doorframe, old, faded, and written on it in barely visible ink were the same numbers I saw downstairs. Same sequence. My stomach dropped, because now I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was behind that door wasn't random. It was part of something someone tried very hard to hide, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I stared at that text from the agent for a solid 10 seconds. "Don't go upstairs. Previous owner specifically requested that area be sealed off." Yeah, that would have been useful information about 20 minutes earlier. I looked at the closed door again, then at the tape, then at the numbers. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. And that's when I noticed something weird about the message. The agent hadn't said, "for safety reasons." She hadn't said, "the floor is unstable." She hadn't said, "there's damage." Just that the previous owner wanted it sealed. That wasn't an explanation. That was a warning. And for some reason, that made me even more curious. I know what you're thinking. "Dude, just leave." Trust me, I've replayed that day 1,000 times. But sometimes a decision changes your entire life before you realize you're making it. I grabbed the doorknob. Cold, almost ice cold. I turned it slowly. The door opened with a long groan. The room inside wasn't what I expected. No hidden person, no furniture, no creepy shrine. Just a small office. At least, that's what it looked like at first. There was an old desk against the wall, a broken lamp, a metal filing cabinet, dust everywhere. For a second, I actually laughed. "Seriously?" I said. I had worked myself up for an abandoned office. But then I walked farther inside, and that's when I noticed the floor. There were marks, deep grooves in the wood, like something extremely heavy had been dragged repeatedly between the desk and the far wall. Not once, many times. The trail ended at a bookshelf, a giant bookshelf built directly into the wall. And suddenly, all those movies I'd ever seen started playing in my head. "No way," I whispered. I walked over and pushed on it. Nothing. Pushed harder. Still nothing. Then I remembered the numbers downstairs, the numbers on the tape. I looked around the room again, and that's when I spotted an old rotary phone sitting on a shelf. Dust covered everything except the number wheel. That part looked cleaner, recently cleaner, like someone had touched it before the house was abandoned. I walked over. The scratched sequence was still burned into my memory, so I entered it, one digit at a time. The wheel clicked as it rotated back. When I finished the final number, nothing happened. I actually felt stupid. Then I heard a sound, a loud metallic clunk from behind the bookshelf. My entire body froze. The bookshelf shifted, only an inch, but it moved. I stared at it in disbelief. No freaking way. I shoved against it with both hands. Slowly, the bookshelf swung outward, and behind it was a hidden room, a real hidden room, about 6 feet wide, maybe 10 feet deep. No windows, concrete walls, one hanging light bulb, and dozens of boxes. Dozens, stacked floor to ceiling. For a second, I couldn't process what I was looking at. My first thought was drugs. My second thought was money. Neither was right. I opened the closest box. Inside were hundreds of old documents, property records, business contracts, maps, photos, thousands of pages, some dating back more than 40 years. The deeper I looked, the stranger it got.
Different names, different companies, different addresses across multiple states, but the same signature appeared over and over. One man's name, the previous owner. And according to public records, that man had died almost 15 years earlier. At least, that's what everyone believed, because what I found in the last box changed everything. Sitting underneath a stack of files was a recent bank statement, less than 6 months old, signed, active, and bearing the exact same name. The dead man wasn't dead, and somehow I just found proof.
I didn't sleep that night, not even close. I drove home with one of the boxes in my trunk, and the whole way there I kept checking my rearview mirror like somebody was following me. Nobody was, at least nobody I could see. The bank statement sat on my kitchen table while I went through the rest of the documents. The more I read, the less sense it made. The previous owner, let's call him Mr. Harper, was supposed to have died 15 years earlier. There was a death certificate, an obituary, public records. Everything pointed to him being gone. But mixed into those old files were newer documents, recent tax forms, property transfers, bank records. Some were only a few months old, and they all connected back to him. Either someone was committing an incredibly elaborate fraud, or Mr. Harper had spent 15 years convincing the world he was dead. Around 3 a.m., I found something that made my stomach turn. A map. Not a road map, a property map. Dozens of locations marked across 3 different states. Most had notes written beside them. Some were crossed out. A few had dates. But one address was circled 3 times in red marker, and underneath it were 2 words: Final Ledger. I had no idea what that meant. But I knew one thing. Whatever secret was hidden in that house, it wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. The next morning I drove back. Big mistake, because when I pulled onto the road, there was a black SUV parked across from the property, engine running, windows tinted. I slowed down. The SUV immediately pulled away. Maybe coincidence? Maybe not. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then I noticed the front door of the house. It was open. I was absolutely certain I'd locked it. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight from my truck and walked inside. The living room looked untouched. The kitchen looked untouched. But upstairs, different story. The hidden office had been searched. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered everywhere. Someone had gone through the room recently, and they knew exactly where to look. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Looks like you found it." I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. Standing in the doorway was an older man, maybe late 60s, gray beard, work boots, calm as could be, like he belonged there. I had never seen him before. "What the hell are you doing in this house?" I asked. He ignored the question. Instead, he looked toward the open bookshelf, then back at me. "You opened it." It wasn't a question. He knew. "Who are you?" The man sighed, long and tired, like he'd been carrying the same secret for years. "I worked for Harper." The name hit me immediately. Mr. Harper, the supposedly dead owner. My pulse spiked. "You know where he is?" The man looked at me for a few seconds, then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, the kind of smile someone gives when they know something you don't. "Son, the wrong people are already looking for those documents." A chill ran down my spine. "Why?" He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "Because those papers prove ownership of something worth a whole lot more than money." I stared at him. "What does that even mean?" He looked toward the window, toward the road, toward where the black SUV had been parked. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Harper didn't fake his death to hide from the government." He paused. "He faked it to hide from his business partners." And suddenly every piece of this puzzle got a lot more dangerous.
Because if those partners were still looking for him and they knew about the house, then they were probably already looking for me too. The old man reached into his jacket. For half a second, I thought he was pulling a weapon. Instead, he handed me a small brass key, old, heavy, worn smooth from years of use. "What's this for?" I asked. His eyes locked onto mine. The thing Harper spent his whole life protecting. Before I could ask another question, he walked away, just turned around and left. No name, no nothing. I rushed to the window. By the time I got outside, he was gone, like he had never been there. But in my hand was the key, and that key would lead me to the discovery that changed my life forever. The discovery that eventually made me rich and nearly got me killed.
I spent the next 3 days trying to figure out what that brass key opened. I checked every room in the house, every cabinet, every drawer. Nothing. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Twice, I noticed unfamiliar cars driving slowly past the property. Once, I found fresh tire tracks near the back fence. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe not. At that point, I wasn't taking chances, so I went back through every document from the hidden room, again and again, and on the fourth pass, I finally saw it. A tiny note scribbled in the corner of an old property survey. 3 words: "Under the oak." That was it. No explanation, no directions, just those 3 words. At first, I thought it was meaningless. Then I remembered something. There was a massive oak tree behind the house, older than the house itself, the kind of tree that's been standing there so long people stopped noticing it. I drove out there immediately. The sun was setting by the time I arrived. I grabbed a shovel from my truck and headed toward the tree. I felt ridiculous, like some guy in a low-budget treasure movie. But after everything I'd already found, I couldn't ignore it. I started digging. 10 minutes, nothing. 20 minutes, still nothing. 30 minutes in, I was sweaty, exhausted, and ready to admit I was chasing a fantasy. Then my shovel hit metal. Clang! I froze. Hit it again. Same sound. My heart immediately started racing. I dug faster. A few minutes later, I uncovered a small steel box about the size of a briefcase. Old, rust-covered, locked. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the brass key. The key slid in perfectly. One turn, click. The lock opened. I lifted the lid, and for a second, I genuinely thought I'd lost my mind, because inside wasn't cash. It wasn't gold. It wasn't diamonds. It was paperwork. Again, just paperwork. I almost laughed. After everything, I'd found another box full of documents. But then I started reading, and that's when I understood why people were searching for them. The documents proved ownership of thousands of acres of land that had been tied up in legal disputes for decades. Oil rights, mineral rights, properties that had been forgotten, misfiled, and passed through shell companies so many times that nobody knew who legally owned them anymore. Nobody except Harper. And now, me. Because hidden inside the box was something else, a signed transfer agreement, years old, never filed, never submitted, but legally valid. Harper had transferred everything to whoever found the ledger and the key. It sounded insane. Honestly, even my lawyer thought it was insane at first. But after months of legal battles, document verification, title searches, and enough paperwork to fill a warehouse, the courts ruled in my favor. Not for everything, but for enough. A whole lot more than enough. The land alone was worth millions. Then came leasing agreements, royalty payments, energy companies, investors. By the end of it all, I had more money than I ever imagined possible. The guy who used to worry about making rent every month suddenly had financial advisors calling him every day. My life changed completely. But here's the strange part. The money isn't what I think about when I remember that house. It's Harper, because nobody ever found him. Not the people looking for him, not the authorities, not me. As far as the world knows, he died 15 years ago. And maybe he did. Maybe all the newer records were part of a plan he put into motion long before he disappeared. Or maybe he's still out there somewhere, smiling at the chaos he left behind.
I honestly don't know. What I do know is this. I bought that house because I thought I was getting a bargain, a cheap property, a fixer-upper, a chance to improve my life. Instead, I inherited a mystery, a secret hidden behind walls, buried beneath an old oak tree and protected for decades by a man the world believed was dead. And every now and then, when I'm sitting on the porch of the house I almost didn't buy, I think about that first day, about the hollow wall, the hidden room, the brass key, and one question still keeps me up at night. Did Harper want someone to find all of this? Or did I just get incredibly lucky? Either way, that cheap little house turned out to be the most expensive secret anybody ever tried to hide.
Before you go, hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable stories just like this one. See you in the next story.